The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseWare continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseWare at ocw.mit.edu.
All right, so we began just a few months ago, with this goal of trying to understand the scientific study of human nature, how our mind operates, why we behave the way we do, from the brain basis, how we see and hear the world, how we think, how we feel, our predispositions to act in certain ways, how we develop from infancy to adolescence to adulthood, through the Middle Ages and into old age, we all hope. The remarkably odd things about human social interactions, which are just amazing, I think, and the challenges that so many people face with a degree of vulnerability in these very kinds of abilities and behaviors. And so it's hard to know, sort of what to conclude on. So I thought I would touch on two things. One, sort of fun to think about, hard to know how to think about scientifically. And one, probably matters to us all the time. So let me talk about this. So when we think about why we do things, how our brain is organized and mind is organized, we know that we've evolved over a long period of time from other species, and that many things in us reflect this evolutionary history. Cast into a modern, unimaginable world from the viewpoint of biology, right? But here we are, sort of creatures from the past living in an incredibly accelerated, changing environment. And so evolutionary psychology, people say, let's try to identify why we have certain patterns of thoughts and feelings given the history of our, the evolutionary history of our minds and brains. And I'll say a word about that. It's tough in many ways, though, to have as much as you believe that's true, it's got to be true, very tough to approach scientifically, because often it comes down to people telling fun, interesting, clever stories, right? Very hard to test. So we know it's a big part of who we are, in a deep sense where we came from, very hard to test experimentally. But I'll show you a couple of examples where people have probed this a bit. And then another question is, in the last decade, some people have said, well, so much of psychology seems to focus on the negative, the harm we're willing to do, the stereotypes we're willing to hold. How about positive psychology? How about thinking about what can we learn from psychology to lead a better, happier, more meaningful life? And so I'm going to tell you about the sort of core results about research about happiness. And some of them I think will surprise you. Some of them will tuck in the back of your mind maybe as you think about what will make you happy. I mean, we all want to be happy in a deep sense. We don't know what's on the other side of this life, but we know this is the one we have in our hands. And so, what can psychology suggest that might make you think what's a path to happiness? So we talked throughout this course about the fragile power of the human brain. It endows us with an unbelievable capacity for thought, sight, behavior, vulnerabilities at every stage, from neurological injuries to neuropsychiatric disorders. And again, we know this all has grown through this Paul MacLean triune brain idea, that within us are kind of a version of reptilian brains, within us are simple mammalian brains, and then finally the primate and human expanded neocortex. And that so within us, it's almost as if we represent, in a certain sense, our species history, literally in your brain, literally right now, in some complex way of interactions between parts of the brain that have evolved modestly and parts that have evolved spectacularly in humans. And the usual story, and you're used to this in evolution, is that our brains and minds evolved in nature, and natural selection was a huge, the dominating part of the story. Survival of the fittest for passing genes into the next generation, that sort of all stories boil down to that. And I'm going to tell you two specific examples, one that surprised me, and then one that's just sort of fun, I think, in a silly way. So the first one is attitudes towards race and sex. And this came up, and the second one is different attitudes between men and women who might have in terms of sex and procreation. So let me focus on this for a moment. In the last election, you may remember that there was a long, grueling race across the primaries between Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And in many ways, this is a huge surprise in the United States because with such a history of racism and sexism, the idea that the two leading candidates are a woman and an African American, right, was just kind of an amazing thing. As much as we have distance to go, that we've come that far, that these were the two candidates on the Democratic side who were competing state to state across the country, one of whom would become the Democratic nominee and the president. And I got a call from a reporter from the Boston Globe that he was writing a story saying, which is the worst problem these candidates face, sexism or racism? And many of us, and I'm no exception, our egos get turned up when somebody from the press calls because our name will be the newspaper. We can show it to our friends and family, and and then they know we have a real job, and somebody thinks we know something, right? You laugh. I mean, the graduate students, like their parents never understand anything except when their name gets in a newspaper, right? I mean, you know how that is, right? Okay, so. So I thought, well, I'm going to say something really clever, and all the neuroscience I know and all the psychology I know, either from my own research or for teaching this course, something. I just had nothing to say. I mean, we can all agree that racism is bad and sexism is bad. And it's kind of excellent that candidates are beating those glass ceilings in national leadership. We know from research on things like the IAT test that you heard about that both remain a problem. Negative stereotypes of certain kinds remain in our society to this day. Across society. So, but I was like, which is worse, terrible thing A or terrible thing B, right? And I had nothing to say. And then a newspaper article came out and said, oh, according to evolutionary psychologists, and I was not included because I had nothing to say, right? It was very sad. They said, well, really Hillary Clinton faces the harder path because in their minds, sexism is built into our species because the whole idea of how we procreate, how men and women relate in species and investment, right? That's deep in us, all through evolution. Whereas racism is culturally specific and malleable. There's countries where one group is picked on. There's countries where another group is picked on. There's changes in societies. That's a changeable thing. This is a tougher thing to change, was their interpretation. I thought, well, that sounds good. Might even be true. It's like a lot of evolutionary psychology. A good possibility, a better answer by infinitely far than I could give, but who knows? And then there's one study came out that's kind of curious. So this is a study of children with Williams syndrome, a rare disorder, but very studied in both human genetics and human psychology. And it's interesting, these are the unusual facial features of these kinds of children. They're born this way. And it's caused by a deletion of 26 genes from the long arm of chromosome 7. It's one of the most purely defined and specific genetic developmental disorders in humans. So it's really drawn the interest of geneticists, because a disorder that's really very linked to a very specific part of the human genome always. Distinctive, what they call elfin facial features, developmentally delayed language skills, but maybe the most curious and charming element is unusually cheerful demeanor and ease with stranger. These are the children who will walk up to strangers and talk your ear off and not be afraid of anybody on anything, okay? To an extent that's charming, can get you in trouble with the world being the way it is. But sometimes there are contrasts with autism. So individuals with autism find social interactions sometimes laborious, difficult, mysterious. These individuals find it delightful, nonstop. You get tired sometimes of talking to such children because they're ready to go, infinitely in terms of social interaction. And there's been some study that have atypical amygdala function and lack of fear response there. So that's the background about Williams syndrome. And then somebody did an IAT study. This is in France, but it's been replicated since. That shows that for these children with Williams syndrome, they still have a gender IAT effect. That is, for example, they're willing to consider women less likely to be good at science and math, which we know is silly, but that's a stereotype, okay? But they show no racial IAT effect, and they had control participants who showed both. So now there's still interpretation, but all of a sudden, it's as if this is deeper in the brain, and maybe this is learned, and these children aren't learning this one, but they can't stop this one. Does that make, all right? So a suggestion that there is something true about this evolutionary psychology thing, and that maybe the hardest thing for us to change deep down because of the fundamental of sexual relations in procreation, that's a hard thing for us to work our head around. without being thoughtful and careful about it. So here's an experiment that was used to demonstrate. So what's the usual story? The usual story in evolution is people, on average, not everybody, of course, wants to have kids because that's how they pass their genes down. And who has a lot of investment per kid, in however way you look at it? Women, right? For women, it's just the first part is 9 months, okay? And then the immediate support. For men, how long is the minimal contribution? 15 seconds? Okay, well, 15 minutes. It varies, but okay. So there's a theory that if the only thing you cared about, right, was just getting your genes down there as much as possible. Was it Wilt Chamberlain, the former basketball player, who said he had slept with 1,000 women? That he would be like the champion example in men, and with women, you can't do 1,000 9-month cycles. Okay, so that for men, if that was the only thing in life, and it's not. But here's the experiment they did. We couldn't have an IRB approve this, but this was done at a university. And they said, we're going to show you an experiment like this. And this is meant to be kind of silly, but this is how evolutionary psychology things are expressed, and it's kind of funny, I think. We'll see. So what they would do is they would pick an attractive man and an attractive woman. They were the Confederates. And they would approach a student leaving the library, a random student, okay? And here's the responder. Here's a woman. Imagine yourself as women now, for those of you who are women, leaving a library, kind of late at night, not too threatening, but somebody walks up to you and says, I've noticed you in the library a few times. You seem very nice. Do you think there's any chance we could get together for a date sometime? What percentage of women said yes? In this study, 50%. Okay. Do you think that's high? Okay, let's say let's pretend it was a better approach than what I just did. I tried to make it low-key and nice. A low-key, nice approach, okay? All right. Same, for other women, the same. A male Confederate walks up and says, I've noticed you in the library, you seem very nice. What do you think about going back to my apartment and having some coffee? Okay. We'll take turns on. Women, what do you think is the number? If we start with 50, what? 20? All right. I've noticed you in the library. You seem very nice. I think there's something compatible between us. What do you think about going back to my apartment and having sex right now? See, finally the course gets super practical, right? Okay. Okay. All right. I'm not saying it's right. This is one study, right? All right, now we reverse the roles. Now, men, you get ready, all right? All right. Attractive woman walks up to you and says, I've noticed you in the library. You seem very friendly. We seem to be compatible. Would you be willing to have a date with me sometime? 100%. Would you be willing, the woman says to the man, to go back to my apartment with me right now? All right, you know where this is going. Attractive woman walks up to the man leaving the library and says, would you go back right now to my apartment and have sex with me this very minute? Yeah, because the guy's got things to do, He can't, yeah. What is the citation for this? Let me get that. I heard it in a talk, and I saw the numbers. The numbers are correct. I have to say, when this was presented, there was some murmuring because maybe it wasn't quite IRB approved. I heard it from a good source. I'll get that for you, okay? It's in your notes, and it's okay. All right. So evolutionary psychology, whatever, it's kind of fun, but it's hard to know where it gets you, but it's definitely fun to talk about. All right, so happiness research. So, for a long time, from ancient philosophy to founding of the US to everything, people said the objective of life is we choose Aristotle for itself and never for any other reason. One of the most amazing phrases in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life and liberty. Well, that we would think would be obvious things now, right? But this amazing thing and the pursuit of happiness, as important as life itself and liberty itself, the pursuit of happiness. And I think we know that in our own lives, as we relate to other people, as we pursue careers, as we do things, where we put our limited lifetime resources, time and effort, We want to end up in a deep way to be happy and make the choices to get there. So we can think on average, what are the kinds that you could think in your head, what makes you happy, what makes you unhappy, and a standard list might be, people definitely want to be healthy. Nobody minds being wealthy. We'll talk about that. It never hurts to get a new car, a new TV, or new stuff, right? What makes you unhappy? Physical injury, emotional injury. I mean, hey, those are, that would be kind of standard. Now, how do you measure happiness? All right, and this is the part where you get into the funniness of psychology. See, you have with you a questionnaire, which is one of the most widely used measures of happiness. So I'll just give you a moment to look at it. You can fill it out for yourself. We're not going to collect it, just to, and you may not even want to or whatever, but just to get a feeling of this. And you could say, oh, yeah, sorry. Are there anybody else who didn't get it that we could help you with? OK. Oh, a few hands over here. Oh, thank you. Again, let me say, whoever did this amazing display has made me super happy, so you're ahead of me, OK? Thank you. So it's measuring like that. You ask the person, like, basically, how happy are you, right? And we have a tendency to be suspicious of just asking people straight on, because if we ask them straight on, would you say this line is as big as this line? If 3 other people said that, you say, no, not me, right? If you say, would you zap somebody, until that you think they're dead in another room? You'd say, no, not me, right? So we're very suspicious about what people say they will do and what they really do. But for happiness research, it's hard to beat that. Here's another one. You can circle the happiness that represents you, OK? Because what's the better question? What's the more objective measure to decide that somebody's happy? A brain image, a blood test? We don't have a better thing than the person's own statement about their sense of happiness. All the way back to a Roman philosopher, the happy man is not he who seems thus to others, but who seems thus to himself. We don't know of a better way to ask you if you're happy than to ask you if you're happy. Okay, so it's not the most satisfying kind of objective scientific measure, but maybe it's the life we lead anyway, right? We decide if we're happy or not, in some sense. So if you ask people, on average, how happy they are, a lot, 2/3 of the people will put themselves here. Almost everybody above average. Few people report that they're consistently unhappy. And I'm going to come back to this, but the thing that has struck happiness researchers, surprisingly modest influences, and I'm going to touch this up a little bit with recent study, of social status, income, gender, or ethnicity. A number of things that you could have thought would touch that, surprisingly don't touch it, or in very limited ways. But I'll tell you a little bit about those limited ways. So on a 7-point scale, the average is 4 or 5. College students, 4.9. Older people, happier. We've talked about that before. Ironically, even though older people probably face more challenges in various ways and limited lifespans, they seem happier by self-reports. One argument that income has a little relationship is this kind of a graph that looks at the average income in the US from 1930 to 1991. So here's this increase that's not going up anymore, but it was in the last century. And self-reported happiness. And you could see that at some point, it goes up, but then it flattens out. So it's the general thought, and I'll show you a little bit more detail, is, not much money, or in current situations, poverty, does strike down people's sense of happiness. But once you get above some threshold, and of course what that threshold is varies in so many ways, depending on who you are and what you expect. But once you get above some threshold, that's not the biggest part of the story anymore. And that's pretty much a general finding. They've done all kinds of surveys about happiness across countries. It's a really interesting thing about happiness research. It's more powerful than you can imagine in grabbing hold of the minds of many people in public policy. Derek Bach, the former president of Harvard, has written a book suggesting that happiness research ought to be the basis of public policies by the government. That if you know what makes people happy, why, short of giving everybody $1 million every year, why wouldn't you tweak every policy to, even if people don't think it will make them happy, but you know from research it will. And then here's a world map where they survey people all over the place. The darker the color, the more people reported themselves happy. Now, this is very tricky, right? because now you're in the full scale. There's things like poverty, but there's also things like cultural emphases, right? In the US, we talk a lot about happiness. That concept is less prevalent in many other cultures, relatively speaking. So it's hard to know how much is the culture, how much is the actual per capita income relevant. But people are pursuing these things. And they are finding roughly this approach, the most recent one, that again, in countries where there's a lot of poverty, it's less, and in countries where you start to have higher income. So, poverty is still associated with less happiness, and you can guess that is reasonable. And there are more studies like this, again, about that direction. So early on, people said that people, that income has nothing to do with happiness, and that seems not quite right, especially at the lower end of poverty. Now, Dan Kahneman, the Nobel laureate psychologist at Princeton, has spent the last few years talking about what he calls a focusing illusion. And let me tell you what that is. It's basically this. When thinking about one topic, could be income, could be graduate school admissions, like whatever the topic is, fairness, and whatever the topic is. When you're thinking about the one topic, people tend to attribute more importance to that topic than it really has. They think it accounts for more of what goes on in the world when they're focused on it. And you see this all the time in political discussions. Like, it's all the deficit, right? We just fix the deficit, everything works. It's all raising taxes. If we just do that. People fixate on one thing, and then that's the answer to the whole problem. That all the time, never mind political debates, where things might be staged, but even in one's own personal life, that happens. Let me give you an example of how they show that to be true. They have people rate the happiness, just like you had. And then they ask them, and these were, how many dates for the single people? How many dates in the last month? And they get no correlation between self-rated happiness and how many dates you've had in the last month. Now they reverse, for some people, the order of questions. How many dates have you had in the last month? And now rate your happiness, and now you get a positive correlation. The more dates you had, the happier you report yourself. Well, for people who are dating, on average, that's a measure of like getting out there, meeting people. It's an average of succeeding in some path you want to be on. So when you just thought about this, you said, whoa, if I had no dates this past month, I must be pretty miserable. I'm pretty unhappy. I'm thinking about that, right? And all the other elements of your life that contribute to your happiness, because you just focused on that. You just focused on that because the question was asked, recede disproportionately compared to the actual importance. If you go the other way around, how happy you are, and you ask this, there's no correlation, right? Because you're not thinking about this one thing and weighting your overall happiness by this one question or dimension. Does that make sense? Okay. So the order is the whole story. It's that people, when they think about a topic and then think of how happy or meaningful it is, they overvalue that topic because they just focused in their minds on this one dimension. So getting back to this issue of income and how that goes with happiness, here's what they did. The same thing again by asking a specific question and asking your general impression. Same idea. So they said, how was your mood? How bad was your mood the previous day? So here's a specific question about mood. Now, how much time do you think people with various income levels are in a bad mood? And they picked, for example, people making less than $20,000 or people making more than 100. These people who just answered this question said, gee, I don't see anything. Oh, that's right. Thank you very much. Yeah, the cool thing is, they're making videos of these lectures. We have so many applicants to be your peers in the years to come. It's going to be unbelievable, all right? You guys are great. All right. So they said it was about 32% more bad mood if you were making less or more. If you ask people making how much, it's only a 12% difference. It matters, but only a third as much, right? Because you just got them thinking about being a bad mood. So now they over-attribute income for daily happiness. And here's a kind of interesting thing, and it's a trade-off, and it gets us to what is it in your life that makes you happy. So people making over 100,000 spend about 20% more time did I get this reversed? Okay, so people making over 100,000 spend more time, I'll fix the slide up, sorry, spend more time on doing things that they report as being kind of stressful. Work, pressured shopping for the family, pressured childcare situations, what they call obligatory tasks. And people who make less money spend considerably more time doing things that everybody considers fun when they're doing it, socializing or watching TV that you like, okay? So you can see it's kind of weird. It's a little bit of where you put your time and what counts for you to feel happy about something. Everybody's in pretty much agreement that, like you've heard about almost everything, twin studies suggest the set point of happiness, whether you rate yourself as always super happy, moderately happy, or somewhat grumpy, seems to be about between 50 and 80% heritable. So it's as if a piece of us is born to be super happy, medium happy, or chronically grumpy, okay? There's not a better or worse way to be, right? Okay, so that people will call this a set point. So of course things happen on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis that push you up or down in happiness, of course. You get good news, you get bad news, you have fearful things, joyful things coming up. But the idea is that people tend to get back pretty fast to the set point, their level of whatever that is, of chronic, constant happiness. And this is kind of an amazing finding. So let's take a look at that and add one more point. So here's extroverts by personality measures and introverts. And extroverts report themselves as being happier. So that's a set point example, a personality thing that seems to go over time. But they share the bumpiness of the week. Here's how happy they are on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Whoa, a weekend approaching. And the misery of Sunday when the weekend is over. so you can see in both things, of course, they're responding to the work week cycle of heavy work, anticipation of the weekend itself, and anticipation of the workday, right? Both groups do. But the set points seem to be a little bit different, the chronic constant level. Now, there's been a bunch of ideas about a question about whether people can be too happy. Can a person be too happy? And here's what they find, that if they take people who say, I'm super, super, super happy, and you ask them what's going on in their life that makes them super, super happy, those people often report that it's close relations to other people, and often good deeds or volunteer work is the thing that's making them super, super happy. A little less happy on average, but still pretty happy, are people who have higher incomes, higher education, and more political participation. Okay? All right. So look at these two things, and you can say in your own life, all these things will matter. But which is the model of success for you in your heart? The human relations and doing good, or the sort of income, education, active in your world thing. And it's not one is better than the other. It's not that you have to choose one or the other. But it seems like people will tend to focus more on one or the other. All these things are matter, okay? But where you put your heart, it's easier, or you end up doing this if you're on the most extensive happy. So maybe if you want somebody to do a certain thing for you, you don't want them to be so happy. They have to be a little bit grumbly about stuff, right? If you think the world's perfect, you're not going to fight for political change, right? Okay. So what makes us happy, and it turns out in interesting ways, it's more complicated than you think. And so it's worth thinking about because your first intuitions might not pan out. So here's an example, but I want to tell you this, I'll remind you this again, and then switch to an everyday one. So one part of happiness is that when we reconstruct what made us happy growing up as a child, what made us happy as an adolescent in high school, what made us happy last year, last month, last week, that's all out of memory. That's not the current moment of joy or frustration. That's your sense of what was it all about? Where was I in terms of happiness? And so Kahneman again did this work with looking at pain ratings during a dental procedure. And he said, what determines your memory for how painful it was? And the two values were the peak of the pain and the ending intensity. So that if you added a little extra pain at the end, people actually rated the whole session in memory as less painful. Okay, you add some mild pain at the end, rated as painful, okay? But because it was mild, because the last number that goes in their algorithm in their mind is the strength at the end, and the other number seems to be the peak, he could predict pretty well how you would rate the painfulness of the entire session. So this shows you that in many ways our minds construct our definitions of happiness. They're not simply our sensory experience. And here's a thing you could think about for a moment. Now, many of you have had jobs or something. You haven't had, most of you, a long work period on a consistent basis. Most of you, I'm guessing. But think about, are you happier at work or vacation? So if you ask most people, are you happier at work or vacation, most people will say vacation. That's why I work 50 or 51 weeks of the year to have that awesome vacation, right? Okay. If they do a study where you carry a beeper on you, and they beep you every once in a while, unexpectedly, and say, okay, 1 to 7, how happy are you? And some days you're at the office, and some days you're on your vacation. What happens? You report yourself happier at work. Okay? On average. Of course. So that's amazing, right? Like, why do we have vacations at all? Not to be miserable, right? You know, I mean, could you imagine an ad that said, like, you know, come to our hotel, you'll be less miserable than another hotel on your vacation, right? That wouldn't work, right? So what do you think is going on here? Well, what's going on here is the interpretation. This is the finding. What's going on here, the interpretation is, when we think ahead about a vacation, or when we reconstruct it in our mind, there's some things about it that make us like it a lot. When we're on the vacation, and you may know this, and I think part of it is the anticipation of vacation sometimes, what happens? Hotel wasn't so good. You got that food poisoning that ruined the whole trip. Your brother or sister were really a nuisance. Your parents were a drag. Your parents can't understand why you were so sulky. You know, it's like you didn't have the space to separate out and get yourself, you know, all sorted out. Is it okay? I just I'm not. You know, I had that too as a kid. I mean, sometimes you sort of whatever little conflicts you had at home seem to get exaggerated when you're jammed in together for long periods in cars or rooms or tents or whatever. And then you go back home and in a couple of weeks you go, man, that was an awesome vacation. I'll never forget it. It means so much to me. And it's not that you're faking it. You really feel that. Otherwise, you wouldn't get ready for the next vacation the next year, okay? So what this suggests is, in ourselves, really, there's at least 2 ways or 2 minds thinking about happiness. One is a moment-to-moment happiness. That's real. And one is a sort of big picture, what is my life about, okay? And I feel like my life about is going to interesting places with people I care about. That's a vacation. So, you know, it's not that it's not that people are hypocritical. It's that in them, there's these different dimensions of happiness that are tapped by different moments of thought. Happiness researchers, their most controversial topic, because they can explain almost everything in the story I just told you, is children. So, you know, you talk to parents, and over 33% will say the single biggest thing that's the joy in their life is having children or grandchildren. That's a very common thing. You could say you're surprised it's not more, okay? But still, it's a lot. It's the single biggest thing. And I think people really mostly believe that, and when they say that. If you have people keep a day-to-day diary, the moment-to-moment source of happiness, and they rate 1 to 7 everything they just did, so it's kind of fresh in their memory, okay? Childcare is rated just over housework, below sex, socializing with friends, watching TV, praying, eating, and cooking, okay? Because, again, it's this weirdness of like, you know, oh, he's not doing his homework, or we're afraid she's doing something, or, you know, or little kids are just running around not doing what you ask them to do, and it's so frustrating because you can't get it. You know? So moment to moment, so happiness researchers don't understand why people have children at all. They can't explain it. Okay, there's a lot of effort going on to come up with some formula. Okay, and again, it's not that people will tell you, "Oh, we can't believe we had kids. How stupid was that?" You know, they say and they feel. You know, it's a phenomenal source of happiness for them. It's just when you ask them, "How about 5 minutes ago?" They go, "No." You know, why did he talk that way? Why doesn't he or she listen to me? Why don't they clean the room ever? They're 25 years old. They can make their bed, you know? Or whatever. I'm trying to. Okay, all right. So it's really interesting, these 2 different dimensions of happiness. So this idea that within us, there's multiple selves. The moment-to-moment self, that's real. The big picture, what is my life about, that's real. They're not always perfectly aligned. In the US, the moment-to-moment happiness in a recent study increases until about 75,000. Of course, that's an average, depending on what you need to buy, that number will move. But then it tops out on average. But the big picture, emotional well-being, but overall satisfaction keeps going up with income. Now, you have to be very careful on these things. These are all correlations. Everything I've told you just about is a correlation, right? So when you say overall satisfaction, sort of big picture sense of life goes up with income, is it really the income? What else could it be? Is it literally the size of your paycheck? Does it have to be that? Yeah. It might be the kind of job you're doing on average. And we know there's phenomenally important jobs that are underpaid in this country, okay? We know that. But there's a lot of jobs that are kind of fun to have that are decently paid, okay? You know, doctors, lawyers, scientists, you know, a lot of people find those jobs to be pretty fulfilling and pretty decently paid. And there's other ones as well, okay? All kinds of jobs are decently paid that can be fulfilling. So it's not necessarily that it's just about literally, if you know, $3 more and you're $3 more happy, right? So these correlations are very tricky. But again, the sense that moment to moment tops out at somewhere here, you know, well above poverty, but then big picture keeps going up somewhat. So think for a moment, if you can, just for a moment, think about yourselves 5 or 10 years from now. And when you think about, if you can, just for one moment, specifically imagine in your mind what you might be doing 5 or 10 years from now. And put your hand up if you thought of something pretty positive. A hope. Okay. Put your hand up, Hal, if you thought of something kind of negative. I mean, some of you have, oh boy. Okay, all right. Most people claim they think about positive things in the future rather than fumbling or failing. So how good are people at predicting what will make them happy? How good are people at predicting what will make them happy? What people call affective forecasting. So I'll give you 2 examples, you know, one that's closer to my life and one that might apply to everybody. Actually, I'll tell you a word about this. It's a funny story. If I don't get tenure, I will be sad. If I get tenure, I will be happy. So you know what tenure basically is? You're given a position, a faculty position for a lifetime unless you do something really horrible, right? Okay. So you can't be fired no matter what you do, almost. Okay, and you don't have freedom from that. Okay. So on the other hand, what happens if you don't get tenure somewhere? Do you know what happens? It's not so pleasant, I could tell you. It's not the end of the world at all. But let me just tell you what you know going in. What you know going in is your colleagues are going to meet, they're going to vote, they're going to say no, which kind of hurts because you've been there 5 or 6 years, right? Okay. And then you have to leave town. Okay, you don't have to leave town. There could be another university nearby, but usually because we're so super specialized in our fields, you have to leave town, okay? And go somewhere else. And you have to tell your parents, I didn't get tenure. You have to tell your friends, I didn't get tenure. And all your friends who you know from work go, oh, I'm sorry you didn't get tenure. For a year, everybody you meet with goes, oh, I'm sorry you didn't get tenure. So you just don't want that, right? Okay, well, you know, it's a moment. I mean, none of us want it. So everybody says, I'd rather get tenure than not, okay? Would you rather win the lottery than not? Sure. Okay. Happiness researchers love these things. So it turns out that for a couple years after you don't get tenure and all the negativity and leaving town and getting another job, and by the way, some people have not gotten tenure and become amazing superstars. So the tenure process is often incorrect in its evaluation. But 2 years later, no difference in happiness at all. It doesn't really matter in the long run. Winning the lottery, a year or 2 later, no difference either. There's a whole research field that runs out the minute somebody wins a big lottery. And I had a bit of experience on this, although under the ratings, because somebody working in my brother's house won the single largest lottery at that time prize ever for an individual lottery winner in the United States. It's been exceeded since. It was something like 187 million. And she was definitely pretty happy, you know, and she's been, I have to say, remarkably wise since then. You know, in how she's used the money, has been a very stable person, kind of. But there's equal number of stories of people who get into huge trouble. Actually, the most amazing story, it's sort of silly to share, but I think I have a relatively short lecture, so this was in the news because you know how with the lottery they say whoever wins this will win the single lottery. Okay, so there's a huge number of tickets sold, and some guy, a taxi driver at the airport, because all the news outlets wanted to cover this, and they were trying, who won? And they knew that there was a winner. They didn't know who it was. And somebody, a taxi driver at the airport, supposedly said, I won the lottery, okay? Now, we knew he didn't, because we knew this person had won it, okay? But all the news channels were running after this person, because other cab drivers thought he said that. And then apparently, all the people he owed money to were hunting him down. And he had to hire a lawyer to sort of fight off people. And so he was really miserable. And it was sort of a sad, weird thing to be the lottery winner who didn't get the lottery, right? But everybody thought you did. And there's other stories in towns. These are amazing stories if you follow, where they know somebody won the lottery in the town, but the person doesn't have to come forward. And then you get all this weird stuff because other people start to guess who really has a ton of money amongst them, okay? And they have wrong guesses, and they go and say, like, my mother needs medical surgery, won't you help me? And the person doesn't have the money, or maybe that one does, but most don't. There's only one. And so the whole town gets into huge fights and misery because they're assuming that somebody could do amazing things for everybody, but they're just being mean and not doing it, right? And 90% of their guesses of who that is are wrong. Anyway, sorry. More than you want to know about lottery, but I can tell you that on average, a year or two later, no difference. So it's amazing. You would think, that would make my life if I won the lottery. And probably it does in terms of plasma TVs. But in terms of self-rated happiness, no difference. And here's a more amazing thing in a certain way, although if you talk to patients, not as amazing. If you have an unexpected accident leading to quadriplegia or paraplegia, so you really can't get around, return to typical ratings of happiness in 3 months. So we're incredibly unable to predict because we would have all kinds of ideas about how long these would brutalize our sense of happiness, and we're wrong. We don't know how to predict what will make us happy. And so people call this hedonic adaptation, or a set point, that you go back to your set point over an incredible range. You do respond, but you go back to it over an incredible range of life outcomes. So here's a small experiment compared to these things, but a controlled experiment. Dan Gilbert at Harvard, who's done amazing work in this area, he had Harvard students in a photography class choose their 2 favorite pictures from the entire class, and they were told they have to give one to their teacher and they can keep one. And there were 2 conditions. In one condition, once they gave that picture to their teacher, that was it. In the other condition, they could change the picture. They could change the picture in a few days. Now you know in all this course, every time you think A, go opposite B, right? Because that's. But if you weren't amazingly sophisticated psychologists at this point, if you were just a person on the street, which do you think would sound better, having no choice or having the possibility of exchanging the picture if you want to in a couple of days? The choice. We like choice, right? No. The people who are happier are the people who say, once you hand the picture, that's to me. These people are sitting around going, I don't know. What would I be happier? This picture, that picture? I don't know. I can't say, right? Because also, once it's an irrevocable choice, what amazing human thing comes into play that helps us feel good about our lives? Cognitive dissonance. Did I pick the right picture? That teacher's a sucker. I thought they were the 2 best, but the one that teacher took, that was pretty bad. I can't believe how lucky I am that irrevocably I ended up with this picture, right? The person who has days to do this, they can't let cognitive dissonance come in and fix up their choice. Paradox of choice, why choices can be painful. So again, we like choice, I like choice. There's an experiment, people say you go into a typical big grocery store, 285 cookie choices, 13 sports drinks, 75 iced teas, 200 channels, and more, right, on cable, okay? So they did an experiment in Palo Alto, Stanford's group, in a gourmet food store, and they had exotic, high-quality jams, and you could taste some jams and then get a coupon for $1 off if you buy the jam. All right, so typical kind of thing you might see sometimes in grocery stores. And they would have you taste either 6 jams or up to 24. Now, most people didn't do 24 jams, okay? Because you wouldn't want to have that many even single tastes of a jam, but you'll try a few, right, at a table like this. So first of all, here's the 2 tables, 6 jams or 24. More shoppers came to the table of 24. Well, you see 24 jams out there. It's kind of impressive, right? Like, there's got to be something I like there. What's going on, right? So more people are drawn to the big choice department. Now, when they get there, they only have about 5 jams. These people have about 6, so it's about the same number of jams that you taste, big display, lots of choice, limited choice. What happens in your actual behavior? Well, if the 6-jam table, 30% of the people purchased a jam. If it's a 24-jam table, only 3% made their purchases. So what do you think happened? We don't know for sure. This is the actual behavior, exactly the opposite. More choices among jams led to less purchases of jams. What's your guess as to what happened? Yeah?
The people who look at the 24 jams were in a jam.
Well, what?
They were in a jam.
They're in a jam. That's pretty good. They were in a jam, yes. And because what? Because I tried 5 or 6. That's all I could try, but there's another 20 out there, and they could be awesome beyond belief, and I'm not going to commit. Okay? Because there could be some awesome jam around the corner, and I've only tried 5 or 6, right? So they're overwhelmed. And instead of happily getting a jam, they're jammed up, as you said. And they go, well, who can begin to figure out what's the right jam for me? It's just way too big, right? So all those choices make them less likely to make a purchase than this. Exactly the opposite of what you might intuitively. Too many choices are burdensome. And you might, some things are big, but calling plans. I don't know if you've ever tried to compare calling plans across phone services. But you sit down for a few moments and you just give up. Maybe you don't. Okay. Health insurance things, retirement plans. You just get all these complicated menus, and a lot of people just give up, and they just go like, "What's the cheapest?" or what do most people do? Okay. Because it's just too hard to figure out. So when they do surveys of asking people what people think will make them happy, these are the most common answers. If I get into a relationship or a marriage that I like, if I have more flexibility at work, getting a baby if that's what you want, losing weight, cure of a chronic disease, making more money, having more time, advancing in beauty. Okay, this is the list. It's not a surprising list, right? What would make you more happy? And again, we know that happiness set points are about 50%, 10% estimated as circumstances like poverty, things that you can't help in your life, just can't help. But happiness researchers are trying to make the case that about 40% of our happiness depends on what we choose to do. So that's a big piece, okay? It's a big piece. We can't help some things in our genes or in our global environment, but this is almost half. And these are estimates, maybe it's more, but this is the current estimate. And research, over and over again, shows that it's wrong to think that happiness is found, like you get there and here I am happy, that it's in changing in your circumstances. I move in a city, I get a promotion, I meet another person. That's the happiness. And that you either have it or you don't. I'm just a person who's not happy. All these things, the objective evidence is against. And here's what researchers find goes with in experiments and in correlations. Here's their list from as objective evidence as they can get in this kind of work. Time nurturing relations with family and friends comes out as a #1 thing that plays out. Expressing gratitude and helping others. Whole experiments where if you just did something nice, people feel awesome. In fact, I heard a Berkeley psychologist say, just try to feel unhappy after you just expressed gratitude or helped somebody, and you can't even do it. Okay, I don't know if that's quite true, but experiments have shown that when you have people express gratitude or do something to help others, their happiness ratings go zoom right up. Practicing optimism about the future, savoring life in the present, physical exercise, commitment to lifelong goals and ambitions, a sense that you have a path that makes sense to you, right, as opposed to sort of bumping around from opportunity to opportunity, and something about having an approach to coping or resilience when bad things happen. I mean, I'm sure in some of your lives, heartbreaking bad things have happened. Most of us get some of them. Many of us get everyday things that we struggle with. And the path by which we deal with adversity, huge influence on self-reported happiness. So again, so this is my final slide. And I hope that this course, I mean, you guys have made me happy throughout this course. I've had incredibly pleasurable lunches and dinners and brunches with students from the course. This is just stunning for me. It's truly moving. I'm just very grateful to have had the chance to introduce you to these ideas. Have a okay exam period. You have to get through that. Bounce back and cope and have a great summer. Thanks very much.